Thanks for staying with us here on the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. We put the spotlight once again on the hunt for COVID vaccine. And every single day here on the Urban Debate, we've been bringing you the latest updates, simplifying it for us to understand, busting the myths, clearing the misconceptions, and we've had experts who are here to help us understand what now from here on. Now, the entire focus is on companies like Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, who are right now literally the front runners for a COVID vaccine. They have applied for emergency use authorization with our authorities. They've already made their application, and today that was taken up for consideration. Now, the subject expert committee of the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization has asked for additional data, we're given to understand, for safety and efficiency from both of these companies, both Serum Institute of India and Bharat Biotech. So their applications are actually still under consideration. Now, before I take you further in terms of updates, I want to go across to Ayushman, who's joining us. Ayushman, help us understand. Today, we know that they were going to take up these two applications, at least for Serum and Bharat Biotech. What has happened so far? What can we expect next?
Well, Tanvi, today the expert committee, which has been formed for the authorization and even for assessing the impact of the safety and efficacy data of the vaccine candidates, they today met and they saw the Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, and after deliberating upon their applications, in which they were seeking the emergency use, the officials said that they need additional safety and efficacy data for COVID-19 vaccine candidates for both these companies. The application which has been submitted from Bharat Biotech, it is still in third phase, so the safety and efficacy data has been sought from them. And in the Serum Institute's application, it has been said that they need to give the immunogenicity data from a clinical trial which has been conducted not just in India, but also in United Kingdom, along with the outcome of the assessment of UK Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, which has given the nod to Pfizer. So in UK also, we know that AstraZeneca's Covishield is awaiting the approval. So once the immunogenicity data from UK comes, that will also be assessed here. So if they get approval there, so that will pave way for India as well. But for the time being, both Bharat Biotech as well as Serum Institute, both have been told that additional data needs to be given. And it is very important to mention here, Tanvi, that both these applications of Bharat Biotech and Serum Institute are still under consideration. It's not that they have been disapproved or they have been rejected. They are still under consideration. And our sources have told us that next meeting, though it is not decided, whenever it takes place, additional data, whenever it is given to the CDSCO, it will be discussed and accordingly action will be taken.
All right, Ayushman, thanks so much for joining us, and you're putting that in perspective in terms of what you've learned from your own sources. So the applications are under consideration, but more information has been sought. Like Ayushman said, details even from United Kingdoms on what they saw there. And of course, if UK gives approval to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, then that will be a big boost for Serum's application here in our country as well. Now, let me just very quickly tell you what's the situation right now. Who are the ones who are seeking in India's nod and hoping to get this nod very shortly? Covishield, which is the vaccine by Serum Institute developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. For that, the testing is underway here in India. That's what has been going on for a few months. They have begun their phase 3 trials on September 21st. Safety data of phase 1 and 2 is actually what has been submitted by Serum. Effectiveness of phase 3 trials is being sourced from United Kingdom and Brazil. Now, the other one is Covaxin, which is by Bharat Biotech in collaboration with National Institute of Virology. They've also begun their phase 3 trials, but they're still in the process of carrying it out. There are more participants that are being enrolled right now at this point of time. Pfizer, of course, is the one that's been done internationally, and they were the first ones to seek approval. They're also waiting for their approvals in US by the US FDA. Very close to getting that, at least in United States. Pfizer has already got their approval in United Kingdom, but the problem there is that already UK regulators come out with a warning saying some of the healthcare professionals who were given that vaccine then got an allergic reaction. So they're investigating that. So they've sounded off an alert, especially for allergic reactions to the Pfizer vaccine in United Kingdom. Now, let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us. The simple questions that I have tonight is, what are the stringent checks that are put in place for vaccine approvals? How much of data is needed? Is data just up to phase 2 okay for emergency use approval? What about the next round? How much of data has to be studied by authorities before they can allow mass immunization? Can that just be done with emergency approval? And of course, will the vaccine really give sufficient immunity to all? I think that's one question that I will ask our experts again and again, because there's some amount of misunderstanding here about how it will work. Let's say good evening to Dr. Virender Singh Chauhan, Emeritus Professor for International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotech, joining us this evening. Good to have you with us again, Mr. Chauhan. Divya Rajagopalan, Senior Assistant Editor with the Economic Times, with us this evening. Professor Dr. Achal Agrawal, co-founder for Covindia, also with us this evening. And Dr. Shiv Pillai, Professor of Medicine and Health Sciences and Technology at the Harvard University, also joining us this evening. Good to have all of you. Divya, I want to just quickly start off with you. Since we are tracking all these developments, we were all closely watching what's happening today with the CDSO expert committee. And the fact that they haven't come out with any official details obviously left room for a lot of speculation. But clearly it looks like they're going to take some more time and do some more in-depth study before taking a decision.
That's right, Tanvi. I think the most important thing which now everybody is asking from the drug regulator is that we need some transparency. We've seen today, since evening, there have been several reports that's been flying on that the application has been rejected, not approved, but we still don't know what exactly happened at the subject expert committee. And this is something that the drug controller owes to the people of our country, to just kind of give a clarification on what happened. If there is no rejection, what exactly are they seeking from the companies? If it's about immunogenicity data, if it's about safety data, it's a good thing that they are actually asking for much more stringent data from these companies, but they need to come out and communicate this to the public, because otherwise it leaves room for so much of confusions and speculation, which we don't need at this point of time. So what we understand, and as your reporter also pointed out, is that they've asked for more data from Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech on what stage and what is the efficacy of their vaccine looking like, and what's the safety data. Now, Bharat Biotech, for example, went into a trial just a month ago. Now, we should know that this is a 2-dose vaccine, so people get vaccine within a span of 30 days. So Bharat Biotech is still in the middle of actually finishing that 2-dose, and they've already submitted their application. So it is, if the drug regulator is asking them for more data or asking them to just wait to get more data, they're being fair. But however, we need to know what exactly they've been asking for. So yes. I think at this point of time, I would say is that transparency is key, and the drug regulator has to come out and communicate what exactly did they ask from these companies.
Yes, I think, it's extremely important. Of course, hopes of billions of people are on these vaccines. Everybody's closely, watching the developments, and everybody's hoping it's out there soon. But we still need to be careful. We'll still need to do all our checks and balances, and we still need to be transparent and honest about what's going on. Dr. Virender Singh Chauhan, I see it as a good development. If the expert committee has turned around and said, well, we need more information, give us more data, we need additional data from you, I see it as a good step. At least that kind of checks are going into it. But help us understand, what are these stringent checks that these expert committees do?
So I totally agree with you. Let me put this in perspective. Let's just take the Pfizer vaccine first. As you would recall, I said last year, Pfizer vaccine, for example, UK has already said that immunizations have begun. It's begun to go to free. US will still take decision tomorrow. And the committee will meet tomorrow for the same vaccine with similar data. Now, you don't think France, Germany, all Western country or Canada are just waiting or will not take any action. So each country has its own rules and regulations. The authorities I mentioned are clearly not influenced, even though the regulatory authorities themselves are living through the pandemic. So moral pressure is on all of us: vaccine developer, vaccine researcher. But you are absolutely right. It is a good thing because whatever benchmark CDSA or CDSO or a DCGI would put, if those benchmarks, the kind of information they require, amount of information they require, if it isn't there, they just simply ask you, please go back, produce it again. It's not a rejection. No, please, nobody should feel this, they have been rejected or something is wrong with the inherently wrong with the data. I think it will they will come back with more data as we will ask. This happens all the time. This is nothing unusual. Actually, it took us more than a year and a half to get a phase 1 trial permission from DCDA. So
Yes.
it's a very good development because it's absolutely good development. And when the committee says yes, then we can be all rest assured they've taken care of safety, immunogenicity. Your earlier speaker said that the DCGA should be transparent. Of course, they'll be transparent. The meeting happened only today. Minutes will be made, data will be made. In fact, these things are made public, by the way. Our regulatory system, I said it last time, let me stress, is extreme. I wouldn't say stringent. They're
Yeah.
extremely careful, cautious, as they should be. Because
Yes, as it
vaccines are
should
going to
be.
go as it should be. And I'm so pleased that they are.
Okay, but on the other side, though, what you said, and I've had many experts who also said that this is also at some point going to become a landmark example to say, well, you can give fast-track approvals and cut out the other bureaucratic delays which are usually there. Like you said, for phase 1 trial permissions, it can take a year and a half. In this case, we've not seen that. But what are the regulations? And I just want to refer to this as I go across to other panelists. Dr. Chauhan, I'll come back to you. What are the regulations? Well, in our country, it's governed by New Drugs in Clinical Trials Rules of 2019. The rules actually don't use the term emergency use authorization. That's what we generally use because across the world, that's how it's really used. But the rules do say that they have provisions for special situations and they allow accelerated approval in some situations. Now, obviously, this is a special situation and an unprecedented one, so those rules can apply. Accelerated approval may be granted for treatment of a life-threatening condition. Accelerated approval, for example, may be granted to diseases of special relevance. It can be considered for approval if remarkable effectiveness is reported in phase 2 itself. That's the important point that I want to highlight. Dr. Achal Agrawal, if you can come in on that. The data that was actually submitted by all three, actually the two Indian ones, is phase 1 and phase 2. They're still collating and tracking phase 3 data. Now, that's extremely important for us to understand, but it's okay. An emergency use authorization permission can be given even basis phase 2 data.
Right. So, just want to correct you a bit there. So, Covishield, they have phase 3 data for UK and Brazil.
Yes, not the ones
they
here.
don't have it for India. Yeah. So phase 1 and phase 2 are generally used for safety. The sample size is actually pretty small. It's about 100 participants. So it is difficult to estimate the efficiency of the vaccine just based on phase 1 and phase 2. Right. So that is why phase 3 is conducted. And more importantly, one point which is being missed, I think, by a lot of people, is the fact that the side effects. Right. So if you test the vaccine, it takes time to understand the side effects of the vaccine. Right. So currently, for example, they only have had phase 3 trials for about a month or 2 months. So they don't have had enough time to see what are the long-term side effects a vaccine could have. Right. So some corners are definitely being cut in that sense. What they are looking at is that there are very few people who had side effects. So there were only 3 participants out of 10,000 odds who showed some side effects for the Covishield. So they said, okay, it's not very harmful. Maybe it's not very efficient if the jury is still out on it, but it's not so harmful, so we can give it a try. Right? That is the logic behind it. More importantly, also for Pfizer, even if it gets approval, so there is a common practice, or there is a law which says that in UK, if something is granted approval, it doesn't need to get approval in India. It automatically gets approval. But this is a special case because the approvals that have been given in UK are emergency approvals, right? So this the rule does not apply here because those emergency approvals, do we agree here or not? So one important aspect in vaccine studies is also racial diversity.
Yeah.
So for example, if you just have people in US, right? So predominantly white population, right? Then you won't be able to. So there might be some genetic differences in the races, and that might create some side effects which have not been studied properly in the Indian case. So generally, in a normal course of events, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 should be conducted in India. We would not expect outside vaccine to be working as well in India.
Yeah, in
Uh,
fact, I think that's why even our own government is focusing more on the 5 trials where we have partnered, which are being conducted in our country, and not so much even on Pfizer or Moderna. I just want to also highlight to our viewers, and I referred to this in the beginning, UK regulators have in fact today said that people who have significant history of allergic reactions should not receive the new Pfizer Biotech vaccine while they investigate 2 adverse reactions that occurred on the first day of country's mass vaccination program. So the vaccine obviously is being given to the frontline COVID warriors right now, the healthcare professionals, and 2 of them showed this reaction, which is why this warning has been given out. Dr. Shiv Pillai, what are the pitfalls? What should we be careful about as we move and fast track all of these processes? And the whole world is fast tracking it for, at every stage. What do we watch out for?
So I just want to point out that though, it's emergency use authorization, the meetings are being held at a very rapid pace, but the numbers, at least for here, I know that in India, the numbers have not been achieved yet. But for the numbers that are being used in the trials and the approval that's been given both in the UK as well as will happen in the US, I'm pretty sure by tomorrow, is based on pretty large numbers. There are many other trials for other vaccines where you didn't achieve this statistical significance. You didn't have as many people, you didn't have as many infections. It's just because of the widespread nature of this infection that one is able to get this data fast. And instead of meetings being scheduled 3 months later and so on, as typically might happen, they are now being scheduled faster. So I don't think anyone is cutting corners. They are looking at the data. I agree completely on the point about, adverse effects. We are only looking in a shorter time frame of about 6 months. So there's a limit to what you can infer from that. But overall, I do think that the data is going to be looked at very carefully. And I don't think anything is going to be done, at least here, which would not be considered safe enough. I agree about the AstraZeneca vaccine, about the 2 people who have come up, but they are both people who appear to have been on EpiPen. So if you have a history of very severe allergic reactions or you're prone to anaphylaxis, clearly you should not take these vaccines right now. And that makes sense. Obviously, if you have immunodeficiency, you shouldn't have the vaccine. But I think at this point, where we have numbers like 44,000 people in trials and where we have some data, it's okay to go forward. The data will be set.
So let me ask you this then. What's the difference between when you give permission for emergency use versus regular? Can a mass immunization program just take place basis data that's been considered for emergency use authorization?
So for vaccines, that hasn't happened before. Okay?
Yeah.
In this case, it is an emergency use authorization, and the vaccines are going into everybody who will take it right now. So I don't disagree with that. But emergency use authorization, the reasons were pointed out very well by my co-panelists, and that tends to happen for certain diseases, for specific conditions, and so on. I do think in this case, the only issue that I would consider, which is a serious one, is that we don't have long-term data. We don't have long-term data on durability of the vaccines, firstly. But I do think they will be good enough for a couple of years based on a lot of data that we've seen. we don't have long-term data on adverse effects. And that is the limitation. But we will get data over a year by the time, it reaches the second phase or so. You would have had data from, because these trials started in March over here. So we are coming close to a year in a few months. So there will be data.
But that's very different, Divya, from the ones that we are betting on here, which is either what Serum Institute is working on or Bharat Biotech. Bharat Biotech's phase 3 trials have just about started. So in that sense, we are far away from getting that kind of a long-term data.
See, absolutely, Tanvi. I mean, COVID started off, the pandemic was announced in Jan 2020. So we have to be also realistic that the long-term data would kind of come in a couple of years' time. However, I want to point out about, the responsibility of the pharma companies who are developing these vaccines. Now, of course, we are all rushing the timeline. I mean, it takes 5 to 10 years for a vaccine to get developed, but we are rushing the timeline. However, there are certain process which you see global companies have followed. For example, you're supposed to publish your interim data analysis, which means that as your trial is going on, you kind of come up with interim data which says that this is what we have found in our limited data which we have, and you're supposed to publish in a scientific journal. These are some of the process which is considered good scientific practice. Now, what we have seen with the Indian context, and of course, I mean, I'm not saying that they're cutting the corners and things like that, but these are some checks which is needed, because we are going to send these vaccines to the rest of the world. I mean, if not to the Western world, but to the other countries across the world. And we need to have that scientific rigor to show the world that we are as good, our vaccines are as good and as better as perhaps a Pfizer or a Moderna. And that's why the companies now have an added responsibility to follow these process which they otherwise didn't do it in the past. For example, I mean, announcing the interim data, it would have been such a big step if they would have done that before they had gone to the subject expert committee and presented for an marketing authorization.
Or for that matter, announcing the data and in interim efficacy data, and then later on, a couple of days later, admitting that, oh, what we did wasn't by design and we ended up giving 2 different kinds of doses, even though we didn't intend. So yes, we've seen unprecedented things, unfold in a hunt for a COVID vaccine. But as long as we get a safe vaccine which helps a larger set of people, the goal shall be achieved. Dr. Achal, you wanted to make a point? Go ahead.
So another point that I want to raise, it was raised by in the press again, that the time it will take to get the vaccine to the people.
Yeah.
Right. COVID is still continuing to go on. So by my rough estimates, I think about 20%. Right. So yeah, that it's a very wild estimate, but about 20% of India is already infected by COVID. So they don't need the vaccine. The 20% of India. Right. If it takes, let's say, 6 months or a year. Maybe Professor will correct me, but maybe if it takes a year to get the vaccine out, maybe 70% of our country already has had COVID and we don't need vaccine. So then all this investment will kind of seem wasteful at some point. So
but is it because so here is my confusion there, and experts can help us understand, because many also say that the antibodies don't stay in your system for too long. There may be very few cases of getting COVID again, but would anybody want to take that risk, or would somebody who's had COVID a year ago still want to go ahead and get a vaccine shot? Dr. Pillai?
I would caution assuming that someone who's been infected is going to be protected for more than a year. Okay, yeah. that for sure. I would say that on many counts. There's some percentage. So from our estimates, maybe 10 to 15% of people actually may develop long-lived immunity. And it's somewhat like SARS. 85 to 90% will not. And in them, so if I think of what happened in Dharavi, yes, maybe there was some immunity for some time and that some people were protected, but don't expect it to last. I think that is something that you should be concerned about. This is not measles. It is not providing even the levels of antibodies. You're looking at the levels from patients who are getting the Moderna vaccine, and you're comparing it with people who get disease. It's a huge difference. It's like logs different. And the levels are good enough to protect us in COVID because the antibodies are good neutralizing antibodies. It's natural infection. But they are dwindling by about 6 months. In a lot of the people, they are down. There are some studies saying they're still there, but they are going down, and it will be like SARS, I think. There's a little bit of gut infection that's persisting in most people, and that's why you get antibodies for a little while, but after that, that clears as well. So even when it's gone from the throat, there is a GI tract infection that people have now recognized. So we have some immunity, but it's not good enough. If it comes back, we're going to have an issue. I think even if you've had the disease once, the reinfection rates are going up. So you can only prove reinfection if you sequence the virus.
Yes.
So that's not done thoroughly. And when it's being done now, even in Boston, the rates are going up. It's not high enough, but it will happen. So I'd be concerned.
So that is a possibility. So unless we know more data is collected, we can't say that for granted. In fact, Dr. Virendra Chauhan, we don't even know if any of these vaccines will be a one-shot or a two-shot solution. We don't know whether their impact will last and for how long will that last.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So, okay, there's a lot to be, as everybody is saying, that if we don't know this, how long they've been. This is absolutely true. This is the new virus. We've never seen it before. Of course, there'll be unanswered question. What needs to be understood and celebrated? That on 11th of January, sequence was shared by everybody. And in exactly 11 months, you have almost a working vaccine. The vaccine, when you give it to large number of people, of course so surveillance has to be very good. Of course, you're going to see things which may not be very good. But as I said, the safety, phase 1 safety, phase 2, of course, 2 and 3 have been merged in most cases, is very high quality. Now, when we go to very large population across the ages, different people with different all kind of condition, of course, you will see adverse events. This happens in all vaccines when they're brought in. I just want to clarify the emergency use was actually done in the case of Ebola in Western Africa.
Right.
While the pandemic was on, the Ebola vaccine was given. But let's quickly come to the current vaccine. On one side, we have we should celebrate that the vaccines are there. In 2-3 months' time, you may have even protein vaccine coming, which will be from Novavax, from Sanofi, from GSK. Indian vaccines will produce more data by then. Even if 1 or 2 didn't work, at least half a dozen vaccines will be there. This is the moment to be cautiously very happy. I'm amazed how many volunteers have come up all over the world, Brazil, Mexico, UK, India. And I think that should not be ignored. I think this is a huge success. But we have to be very cautious. And I again will say, you're not asking me to say that.
Yes.
There is absolutely no instigation or no reason to drop your masks off. Every time you will call me, I'll say that. Continue to keep your mask on, wash your hands, and watch this in extreme fascination that science has produced in 11 months of a working vaccine.
Dr. Chauhan, every time you do remind our viewers to not get rid of their mask, even if they've been given a vaccine shot, I'm going to thank you for it because it is extremely important to keep emphasizing on that aspect. But let me ask you this question, and this comes from a very layman's perspective. The applications by these two companies were just filed in the last 1 week, a few days ago. They were taken up for consideration today. Many were expecting a decision today itself. Then we found out that, okay, additional data has been sought. Can this kind of a scrutiny really take place in 1 day or 2 days? What are these checks that the drugs drugs quality control authority actually does at this point?
So do you want me to just give you a general idea of what should be done? I mean, obviously there's reams of data, and people need to go through the reams of data before the meeting.
Right.
You can't just go and look at one page and look at it. The actual statistics is not complicated. You could understand that looking at it for an hour. But looking at the safety data and looking at the little nitty-gritty that people don't often put out, you need to look at very carefully. Was this in a placebo? Was that in the patient who got a vaccine, a subject who got a vaccine or not? Those kind of things need to be looked at. Now, I do think, I actually agree with Dr. Chauhan. We should celebrate all these things. And I do think that with the Pfizer vaccine, for instance, if I was living in Delhi today and I had access to it, I would probably want to get it. Okay, I'm just speaking. I'm not saying that it should be approved without data in India.
Yeah.
But I'm saying I do believe that humans are humans. There are some differences in where we are and what we're infected with in the past, and there are a lot of differences in populations. I agree with that, but the immune system works in a generally similar way in almost everyone. So I would still say yes, get the data, but use the data from other countries as well and combine it and make a decision. You need both.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Divya, if I can come to you, this other aspect, which is about how quickly can we get it to everybody, and not just, the frontline warriors, but after that. Now, Serum Institute, as per ICMR, says that they've already got 40 million doses ready. What's the sense that you all have been getting about, once the approvals are in place, how quickly can the rollout be?
Right. I think, Tanvi, one thing which we have to be very realistic about is that for general people, for healthy people, the vaccine is not coming until the end of 2021. We need to be very realistic about it. I mean, it's not a pessimistic sign, but I think the people who need the vaccine the most are the frontline workers, the nurses, the doctors, and of course, the essential service people. So what we understand from Serum Institute is that they have made at risk 40 million doses. And the demand from the Indian government is to have close to 30 million doses by June of next year. So the Indian government expects that it will require, for its own immunization program, which is to vaccinate 20% of the population roughly, they will need around 30 million doses. What we understand is that Serum is also planning to have like a private market. It's planned to manufacture 100 million doses by April 2021, and this would be available for the private market. But we have to understand, again, I mean, this is something that for the general population, the vaccines might not come until the end of 2021, unless, of course, we have other manufacturers who come in and seek approval from the drug regulator. But I think the regulator is also being careful, which is a good thing in terms of giving the application. But of course, the second point which I want to bring is that India is the hub for vaccines, and especially the COVID vaccines. We have the capacity to manufacture over 1 billion doses. Serum alone can manufacture that. And if you look at the COVID portfolio, after United States, India is going to be manufacturing the second largest number of COVID vaccines in the world. So we will get the access to vaccines. But how and in which phase, we need to be patient about that.
Yes, and the fact that we are so many of us and such a huge population in such a large country to really take it to everybody, even though we have an existing mass immunization, system and a structure in place, and we've already begun the work on upgrading that. There's an app that's already, ready for when the vaccine is there for rollout. So all of these things are being prepared, but there are many things we have to keep in mind. And as I thank my panelists for joining us on this special conversation, I just want to also remind our viewers about it. One thing that right now we are looking at authorization for emergency use, which means that because this is an unprecedented situation, this is the data that we have so far. We haven't stopped our trial work. That's still going on. But this is the information that you can look at and do your safety checks, do your efficiency and efficacy checks, and then grant us permission so that we can start the rollout. The government's work and the authorities' work will not finish there. They will continue to scrutinize the data. They will also track what is the response of people on the ground who are being given the vaccine. How are they reacting to it? How are their bodies reacting to that? All of that data will also have to be tracked, collated, and analyzed. Meanwhile, they'll continue to look at the additional data. And especially in a country like ours, where it's not to say, oh, out of the 10,000 samples, 4 or 5 didn't react very well. When you're going to be immunizing lakhs and crores of people, you need to be very careful about the medicines you're using. So the government authorities and the drug regulator authorities will continue to track the trial data. They'll continue to look at that, scrutinize it before giving the final approval. Suffice to say, like Divya was pointing out, for the common man, for the healthy individuals, for the youngsters, you may not get it so quickly, not for several months. So you should be prepared to continue living your life like you are right now. You should be prepared to move around with a mask on and a sanitizer in your bag. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.